Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The Coyote Choir is warming up on the ridge, and that means, again, it's time for A View from the Bunker. Welcome. I'm Derek Gilbert. Today is June 30th, 2019, and as we are approaching a vacation week of sorts, not entirely for me, but something close to a vacation week, we'll have family visiting from out of town all this week, and so taking 2 hours out of a visit with out-of-state guests to do this program really didn't seem fair to them after all that travel. So we're digging back into the archives for a couple of interviews with a gentleman who I considered a true American hero. He's gone home to be with the Lord, passed away in 2012 at the age of 78. But before he left a legacy that deserves to be better known because he displayed bravery that went well above and beyond the call. And this is a gentleman who knows something about the call of duty, of honor, of service, and of sacrifice. He first came to our attention back in, I think it was 2005, maybe 2006, as Sharon and I watched the series on the History Channel at that time. That was, back when the History Channel actually showed history instead of ancient aliens. The series, it was called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And in one episode, there was a gentleman who was interviewed who described a strange meeting at Fort Benning, Georgia, Special Forces officer who was approached by somebody who was clearly part of the intelligence community, who was looking for someone to take on a mission to assassinate an American civilian, a U.S. Navy veteran. And this our guest declined the mission because he said, I didn't sign up for this. So these gentlemen went on their way and talked with some other fellows on the base. And next thing he knew, sometime later, this U.S. Navy veteran, American citizen, was deceased. Now, you might think I'm talking about President Kennedy, who was a Navy veteran. That's not who I mean. It was, in fact, someone else. Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer, who had some connection to the autopsy of President John F. Kennedy. It was clear from the interview that this gentleman was very distressed about it and said that he had come clean about this decades after the event because he wanted his grandchildren to know what he had done and to try to make amends for some of the things that he had done over the course of his career as a Green Beret in covert ops. He wrote a book that was published some years ago. The website and the phone number that you will hear in the upcoming interviews for ordering the book are still online. So I will put those links back in the show notes that you will hear. For the next 2 hours, we're going to pull out 2 separate interviews, one with Sharon, the podcast that Sharon and I debuted in 2005 called PID Radio. The PID standing for Peering into Darkness. That has kind of gone dormant over the last couple of years as we've gotten very busy with our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, and Sci Friday for Skywatch TV. And of course, all that we're doing at Skywatch TV, we're basically covering many of those topics through those venues anyway. But back in 2005, 2006, we were interviewing people like Tom Horn, Michael Heiser, and others whose information led us down the path that brought us to where we are today. This was one of the most remarkable interviews, one of the most remarkable men that I've ever had the opportunity to interview over the last 15 years. Well, and including a radio career, including some time as a radio newsman that goes back to 1980. So over the last 40 years, this is one of the most remarkable men I ever had the opportunity to meet, and again, honored to call a friend. His book was called Expendable Elite, One Soldier's Journey into Covert Warfare. The man's name, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin.
I feel blessed just to be on it with you. Thank you. And I'd like to stress, too, right at the beginning that anything that I've done that's been worthwhile has been because the Lord has been with me.
Amen to that. Now, we had the opportunity to speak on the radio, my radio program, last week. And, of course, being a secular radio station, there are, we kind of touched on matters of faith, but we couldn't go into it as deeply as we did here, or as we will here over the next hour. And I'm thankful that we have the opportunity. Lord has provided us the resources to do this.
I'm glad that I did not know that it wasn't a Christian station, because I even made a remark there at the end. Happy to be on the Christian station, because I didn't hold back from the fact we didn't get into my testimony in depth, but I let everybody know that it was the Lord who made it possible.
Right.
To do what I was doing.
And that's perfectly fine. And I don't have a problem doing that, because I know that it is a topic that other hosts on our station, some of the national hosts, will discuss on a pretty regular basis. But we're a little more free here and again, that's why Sharon and I decided to continue doing this PID radio program once we got to Colombia. And in fact, now we're going back to doing it on a daily basis, just for news analysis and whatnot on the daily show. But the hour gives us an opportunity to speak a little more openly and fully about the way the real world is, which is, of course, the spiritual, supernatural battle that is going on all around us. And we're just sort of seeing some of the shadows in the way it affects our lives. You served in Vietnam as a captain in the Green Berets, Special Forces, in 1965, 1966. And some of the things that you were called upon to do, which we'll get to in a minute, are just eye-popping, because they run counter to what the American people think was happening in Vietnam and Cambodia during the Vietnam War. It counter to what the government told the people was happening in Vietnam and Cambodia.
That's right.
Why did you wait as long as you did before coming out and going public with what you were called upon to do in Vietnam?
Let me say this. I was saved in 1984, but in 1964, I was trained by CIA personnel to be an assassin in the Green Berets, to be a terrorist, and also how to conduct industrial sabotage. Now, those are not the nice kind of things that you would talk about normally. And, in fact, if you did talk about them openly, as I wanted to at one time before 1984, I was concerned that they would send somebody, they being the United States Special Operations people or the CIA, would send somebody like me to kill me to silence the word that they didn't want put out. But on the 29th day of January, 1984, Old Dangerous Dan, that was my nickname because of the way I was in the Army, was driving a U-Haul truck with my youngest daughter, Danilee Varner, sitting next to me, and taking some furniture from our house up in New York State. We had dropped some off at Danilee and Mike's, that was her husband, and we're taking the rest of it to Mary Kate in Florida, on the east coast of Florida, and Danilee started reading from this black book in her hand, in her lap, which was the Bible, of course, the King James Bible. Mm-hmm. And she just kept reading, and I told her to stop. And she said, well, she's trying to get practiced up for when she talks to Mary Kate, her sister, about coming to know the Lord as her personal Savior. And I said, look, I don't want any of that junk going on. I mean, that's what I thought it was at that time. Mm-hmm. I was just a big, bad old Green Beret, retired. And I had to keep telling her. And finally, when I told her to be quiet and to close that book up, she said, Daddy, please stop the truck. And I said, why? And she said, Daddy, if I can't read the Bible to you, then I don't want to ever talk to you again. And I want to get out and walk home. And I said, Danilee, we're 40 miles from where Mike is right now. And you're going to walk 40 miles because you can't read the Bible to me? And she said, that's right, Daddy. And I almost stopped the truck. But as I was slowing down and pulling over onto the side of the road, I got to thinking, if it's that important to me. She was the closest of all my girls. We called her Danilee because that was the closest to Daniel we could get and be a girl's name.
Sure.
And to know that she would, this is hard for me to say, would not want to even talk to me. She couldn't tell me about the Lord. I started back onto the road and I said, read it to me. And that's the day I came to know the Lord as my personal Savior, the 29th day of January, 1984. And from that very minute, when she finished reading those parts of John and Romans that I really needed to know about, and I swore my faith to the Lord and asked Him to come into my heart, from that very moment, I started thinking about this book, Expendable Elite, only I called it at that time the Baysack Bastards because that was the name of my team that we'd given ourselves. All the teams had different names. Well, Baysack was the river that we were on, and the other word was more or less to put fear into the enemy. And they did. But so it was changed to Expendable Elite much farther down the road after I found a publisher. But when I started the book was when I got back up home in 1984. It took 3 years. Oh, by the way, she did lead Mary Kate to the Lord.
Oh, praise God.
Amen. And between myself and my nephew, we led my wife to the Lord.
How about that?
So everybody's with the Lord.
Now, how old was Danilee when you took this ride together?
Well, let me see. It was 84, and she was 18.
18?
Yep. And let me tell you, that took some guts, because I'm not an easy man to go against, or I wasn't. So I started putting the manuscript together, and as I tell in my book, after I was asked by Colonel Tuttle, who commanded all Green Berets in the 4th Tactical Zone of Vietnam, if I would accept the top secret mission to be the first to go into Cambodia, into the safe havens that our president had given the enemy. After I accepted that, and he told me that we would have no air support, no medical support, and no artillery support when we were inside of Cambodia, and that if we got captured or killed in Cambodia, we would be reported as deserters. I mean, that's the kind of thing you get involved in, or did, and probably still do, unfortunately, with being a Green Beret.
How big a deal was that to cross the border into Cambodia in 1966?
Well, up until the first day of January, which is our first attack inside of Cambodia, the enemy had the entire area along the border with South Vietnam where they could bring in their troops, bring in their weapons, train their people. They had a hospital that we destroyed not far from our part of the border, and a big training center, an ammunition dump, and then they could actually fire rockets and artillery mortars from their side of the border into our side, and our troops were not allowed to fire back. And I'll be sending you some information, by the way. I'm bringing this to a head right now in Washington and with the Judge Advocate General of the United States Army. But our president had ordered that we not fire into Cambodia. When I accepted that command of An Phu, and as I was leaving the room, Colonel Tuttle looked at me and he said, just remember, when you leave that door, this is in the book in the right words, I'm just paraphrasing now, it'll be as if I never met you. So we didn't even exist when we were in An Phu. That's why it was easy to drop us as deserters or whatever else. And the reason that we were able to fire across the border, of course with no support, is that Major Foy Van Lee, my counterpart, who was a Buddhist Hoa Hao who commanded the Arvin Green Beret team and the Irregular Forces in An Phu, where there were 64,000 other Buddhist Hoa Haos. That was all Buddhist Hoa Haos there except for 200 Chams. He had gone to the Minister of Defense and he demanded the right to fire at the enemy. He wasn't going to have his people killed and not do anything about it. So when I went in there, that was the rules of the game. We could go into Cambodia, but we'd go at our own risk, of course, and we'd make sure that we laid a barrage of mortar fire or rockets in front of us. And I never allowed my people nor myself to go deeper than 3 kilometers into Cambodia because it's too easy to get caught in a trap. And I didn't want any of my men hurt or killed that we couldn't drag them back across the border into Vietnam so they could be seen again in one condition or another. So it was not an easy thing, but I enjoyed it because it was our opportunity to hit the enemy where they were. You know, I was very careful, Derek, to not hurt the Cambodian civilians. I mean, the entire border area had villages all along of Cambodians, but we got along so well with them. In fact, a lot of the things that we ate, we bought in Cambodian markets. The ladies from our district could go into Cambodia, and Cambodian ladies could come onto our side of the border. No men could cross the border. But Major Foy Van Lee and I had such a good rapport with the officials of all of the Cambodian hamlets and villages that in 7 months of firing mortar shells and all kinds of ammunition into Cambodia and killing over 500 of the enemy, the Viet Cong, we never killed or wounded one Cambodian civilian.
Wow. Now, again, to remind listeners, this was all done in spite of the fact that President Lyndon Johnson was telling the world that Cambodia was off limits, that Cambodia was a neutral nation.
That's right.
And that if you had been caught, killed on the Cambodian side of the border, the Army would have disavowed any knowledge of your presence over there and would have labeled you deserters or in violation of orders.
That's right. It's interesting, you know, in Green Beret and CIA covert operations, we call that compartmentalization, because you never get a request, and there's no orders, by the way, given to kill people or to terrorize people or to conduct industrial sabotage. It's all volunteer, but you're all hyped up. I mean, hyped up. Everything you do, you feel is for the flag, and that you wouldn't be asked to do it unless it was right. And but you did nothing was in writing. Your commanding officer never knew what assignments you had that were top secret, because it was his commander or even 2 commands back that sent the courier to me, because nothing was ever in writing. The courier to me to ask me if I'd accept a mission, just like when I walked into Colonel Tuttle's office on the day before Christmas of 1965. He did not allow anybody in that entire building while I was talking to him, and he was asking me if I'd accept this top secret mission.
And again, you, as far as you know, you were the very first commander told to cross the border into Cambodia during the Vietnam War.
I'll correct that to say asked.
Asked, okay.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Now, your book, Expendable...
Well, if I wasn't, none of the rest of them have had the guts they're probably all lost people. They haven't had the courage to come forward and tell about it.
Now, your book, Expendable Elite, did you develop the book with just the information that you had saved, or did you get help from former team members in putting together the information in Expendable Elite?
I'm glad you asked that. As anybody can read in the book, I kept meticulous records, and I sent 3x5 cards with details on everything that went on and every day I was there, and copies of monthly operational summaries, situation reports, spot reports, all that stuff, back to the United States to a friend of mine in Fort Bragg who kept it in sealed envelopes so that if anything happened to me, if I was declared expendable, and I can go into the title of the book if you want me to later, then he would give all of those envelopes to a person, an attorney that we both trusted, and then it would go public from there, you know, if they would allow it. But and if the attorney could maintain the courage to do it. But as soon as I finished the first draft manuscript in 1988, I sent copies of it to those team members who I located, Specialist Royce, Lieutenant Strait, Sergeant Taylor, and asked them to look over the manuscript and if they had any comments or anything. And they did, and they all corroborated everything that they could. I mean, it's a lot of different actions going on, and not everybody was involved in everything. The biggest thing that Lieutenant Strait, who is my XO, corroborated on audio tapes, and they made the audio tapes. I didn't record them myself. They recorded them, sent them to me. The jury heard them all, and all your listeners can go to my website, expendableelite.com. They can listen to what my men said about the initial manuscript in 1988, and then the information they gave me to add to the manuscript for the final book, and it's all in the book that was published.
You mentioned jury, and we should probably explain to listeners why you had to go before a jury and why you've titled this edition of the book the Victory Edition.
Okay. Can I go back to Expendable Elite?
Yes, absolutely.
It took 13 years to get a publisher, and I would have said find a publisher, only I couldn't find one. I went to 120 different publishers, and because of the CIA involvement in it, and I was already $40,000 in debt, helping some of the Vietnamese into this country and trying to find a publisher, I had given up in 2002, the end of 2002, I think it was, and I sat here in the same chair I'm sitting in right now, just wondering what I was going to do. I couldn't afford to publish it myself. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find a publisher with guts enough to publish it. 2 weeks later, the phone rings. Same phone I'm on right now. And it said, "This is Chris Milligan, and I want to publish your book." I said, "Sure you do." You probably work for the company, and you want to get my book, my manuscript, so you can control it, and it'll never get published. Said, "You send me something you've published," and you'd only published one book before this. Huh. And I will look at that book, review that book, and I'll determine whether I want to talk to you again or not. So he sent me Barry and the Boys.
Yes.
Barry and the Boys, about drug, and I knew some of the people in there. So I scanned through it, and I called them back, and I said, "Okay." I said, "You're okay, but how did you get my name, and why would you want to publish a book without even seeing the manuscript?" And he said, "Jim Mars called me." I don't know whether you know who Jim Mars is, but he called me and he said, "You call Colonel Marvin and publish his book." So that's how I got published, out of trust from other officers.
How about that? Yeah, Jim Mars is a well-known investigative reporter who delves into a lot of, secret government secrets. Let's put it that way.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I copy him on everything I do. He's great. So I got a publisher, and then I didn't have a computer. I did everything on a word processor.
Oh, my.
And after he'd got it put together on his computer, he called me and he says, "You got to get a computer." And I said, "Why?" He says, "You're being attacked viciously on the Internet." So he loaned me enough money to buy the Dell computer and the other stuff that goes with it. And then I counterattacked and stilled all the sharks out there in the waters. And then we published the book, and I say within a couple months of the book being published, we started being attacked in the mail and on the telephone from the Special Forces Association, wanting that book be declared a fiction book and be taken off the market. And threatening. My publisher threatened the man who bought the screenplay rights on it that there would be serious circumstances happen if they didn't do as they had demanded. Well, we stood by our guns on it, and all of a sudden in June of 2005, I think it was June, we got the sheriff came to my door with a lawsuit in his hand. Oh. And the lawsuit was signed by most of my own men. Now, please, folks out there, don't think bad about my men. And I explain it in the book. In fact, I had forgotten just exactly how critical it was for a Green Beret to lie for any other Green Beret or for the government. And when I first wrote the addition to the book after the trial that we were victorious in January of this year down in Charleston, South Carolina, and when I wrote the addition to the book, I sent it to a friend of mine in draft form who's an ex-Green Beret, and he called me right away and said, Dan, you can't do this. He says, remember this, that if you had been asked to do the same thing your men did the day before you got saved, the day before you had the Lord to trust, you would have done the same thing they did. So I explained that in the new book, in the Victory Edition, that my men were, well, in fact, they were intimidated. And when I tried to reach Lieutenant Strait, a retired major now, the last time I tried to reach him, his wife Shirley answered the phone, and she said, Dan, I can't let you talk to John or we'll lose our retirement pay.
Oh, wow.
Now, just so folks know that this fear comes right up till today. Last year I was in, a year before last, 2004, I was up in Massachusetts for 4 days talking about my book and I keep mentioning this about Lieutenant Strait. And there was a man in the audience who he bought a book and took it home to his father, who was a retired full colonel in the Army, and he took it to his, or told his cousin about it, who's a retired general officer in the United States Army. It was the man who was actually at the lecture, it was his uncle. And he said, look, he said, I guess he just about jumped out of his chair. He says, you tell Colonel Marvin I'll write him a letter under my letterhead, and he could send it to all of his men so they'll know there is no way that they can ever take your retirement pay away. I mean, you can actually murder somebody and go to prison and you'll get your retirement pay because it had nothing to do with the crime. It had to do with your service to the country.
But they were threatening your men with that.
That's right. So I waited for 2 months for that letter from this general, a general officer. And I didn't get it, so I called his nephew, and he called his uncle, and his uncle told him this, in words to this effect. He said, I found out after I told you I'd write that letter that 2 of the meanest CIA agents in the world are here in my area. And he said, I don't want to even hear the name Marvin again. Period. That's how that fear still runs in this country of CIA covert operation, which is the reason that Kennedy was killed, because he wanted to stop that.
So do you think it was, well, let me ask you this. First of all, for background, what is the Special Forces Association?
Special Forces Association is a fraternal association comprised of approximately 10,000 retired and active duty Green Berets, but I soon learned that they're used by somebody, I assume the CIA, to do things that the CIA themselves couldn't do, like organize this lawsuit against myself and my publisher. Oh, by the way, Expendable Elite, you asked me to explain that. I sent 4 different names for the book to the publisher because I respected the publisher's right to choose the title for the book. He chose Expendable Elite, and the reason he chose it is that, and the reason I gave it to him was that we in the Green Berets were not afraid of any enemy. We were so well trained, we just kind of maybe arrogantly assumed that every enemy in this world would be afraid of us. The only thing we feared was the government declaring us expendable and sending somebody to kill us like they did the CO of the A-Team in the Kamal Peninsula that the movie,
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now, that's what that was based on. I knew one of the sergeants and his team, and when the team was ordered out, same as mine was, only the big difference is his team left him there. My team stayed with me. The CIA sent 2 Special Forces assassins in and killed that commander. So that's why people are afraid of the CIA.
So what kind of a budget does the Special Forces Association have? I mean, do they have the kind of money it takes to go hire lawyers and file lawsuits like this?
No, I tell you, my publisher and I knew right from the very beginning, number one, that we would win because we prayed every morning before we went to trial. And we didn't ask that we win. We asked that the trial went the way the Lord would want it to go. Mm-hmm. But we knew that, that number one, we couldn't afford it. And number two, that they certainly couldn't afford it. The men couldn't. The Special Forces Association had stated unequivocally that they would pay for all the expenses of the trial. But then we knew, our expenses were about $200,000 for the trial. Mm-hmm. We knew that theirs would be at least $300,000 because they had 3 attorneys, they had 7 plaintiffs, they had expert witnesses. One came all the way down from Alaska to there, and there's just a lot of expenses involved in it, and figured it would be the CIA funding it. Well, thank the good Lord, the Special Forces Association, when they published the summer issue of 2006 of their publication, The Drop, D-R-O-P, mm-hmm. in there they had the financial statement for January, February, March, and April of this year, and there's not one penny in there shown to go towards the trial expenses.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I just sent that out to have that published, and I haven't sent you a copy yet, but you'll be getting one.
I'll look forward to that. We'll make sure we post that to Watcher Magazine once we get that.
I've asked for an investigation, and I've asked different people to get involved in it, and I'm hoping I can get some Green Berets to come up out of the woodwork. But so far, out of 10,000 retired or active duty Green Berets, only one, a Master Sergeant Gerald Wilsey from Syracuse, New York, has volunteered to go before Congress, and this is what I'm asking for, in fact demanding, is that now that we have so much of the proof that we need, that we be called before Congress to testify to what's in that book.
So what do you hope, then, the American public would learn from such testimony and from your book?
Well, the biggest thing they learn, I think, and in fact I wrote the Gold Star Mothers Association about that, is that our government actually aids the enemy, and they're probably still doing it. According to Colonel Tommy Franks, when he was commanding the whole operation over there in Iraq, to include the invasion of Iraq, they were ordered to leave the mosques alone. So the enemy could stockpile weapons in the mosque, they could send forays out from the mosque, and we could not blow up those mosques. That's aiding the enemy. Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully we'll get the American public to demand of our new Congress, which may be willing to do something about it, where the Republican Congress was not, unfortunately. I'm a Republican, but they're so tied up with the CIA and everything, they wouldn't do anything. Mm. I'm hoping that they will pass a law that says that no agency or individual in this government, to include people in covert operation, can ever authorize that the enemy be aided, period.
So the use of the mosques by the Islamists in the radical Islamists in Iraq is similar to the way the Viet Cong used Cambodia in Vietnam.
That is correct. In fact, in one of his pieces of correspondence, he compared the use. Well, in fact, in his book, he wrote a book after he retired from the army, and in there he compares the mosques. I believe he specifies the mosques with the Cambodian sanctuaries.
And has General Franks done anything since retiring to call for changes?
No, in fact, he compromised his whole position on everything. And even though he and his aide, when I talked to him when they were in the headquarters down in Florida when they were running the war, even though I was told unequivocally that he only got half the men that he needed to go into Iraq so he could secure the cities and get them back the things that the people needed, and even though he was, the thing that upset him most, according to the lieutenant colonel, it's his aide, was the fact that not a soul, to the best of his knowledge, on Rumsfeld's staff to plan that whole thing had any combat experience. when he wrote the book, when he retired, all of a sudden he got the job, a plus job, of starting a new Army museum. I've got a few letters from him since, but I haven't contributed everything because I got his book first. And in that book, it's like he had a love affair with Rumsfeld. He got everything he wanted. There was nothing wrong with the preparation for the war. It was just a real beautiful thing for him.
How much influence did the CIA have over the operations of the Green Berets during your time in the service? How often did the CIA come to you guys and request for missions?
Well, of course, in my camp, they came to me twice. At one time, I kicked them out of the area. It was the same man, Walter McKim, came in with a team under what had preceded the Phoenix program, where they would come in and they would, on their own, determine who were communist sympathizers, and they kill them on the spot. They killed, I think, between 30 and 40,000 Vietnamese. And the man who wrote the preface to my book, Douglas Valentine, wrote the book Phoenix Program, and he tells all about it, to include about Walter McKim. I would not allow him and his people into my area. Of course, I didn't allow B-52s either. I didn't allow Agent Orange. I had good people. We had the will to fight and to win, and we did.
The time when you kicked the CIA agent Walter McKim out of your camp, tell about that story, and what was it that he asked of you that led you to kick him out?
Well, he came into my camp in June of 1966 with a request that I set up an ambush inside of Cambodia to kill Crown Prince Cambodian Sihanouk, Crown Prince of Cambodia, Norodom Sihanouk. And I accepted the mission because I didn't have a love affair with Prince Sihanouk. I figured he was the enemy. Although it turns out I learned many years later that he himself was neutral. It was our president that gave the enemy the sanctuaries. And, well, anyway, he asked if I would accept that, and I said, yes, I will. And we only had one day that we could do it, and it was a little while off, and had to train the men, get volunteers. I got 100 volunteers. I needed 42 was off from my indigenous personnel. Excuse me. And trained them all and got them all ready, but I had a quid pro quo it from the very beginning that President Johnson would actually tell the American people that there would be no more enemy sanctuaries in Cambodia, that they wouldn't be able to use the Mekong River anymore to resupply themselves. Can you imagine that? Anybody listening to this program, how our government was ordered by the President of the United States to secure the Mekong River and to protect boats like Lithuanian cargo ships going up and carrying, like the one that I personally saw, had 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition on it that were unloaded inside the Cambodian sanctuaries for them to then turn and kill our people with. That's what we were up against over there.
So Walter McKim came to the camp and asked you to carry out a hit, basically, on a foreign head of state.
That's right.
Yeah.
We were all ready for it, and then 2 days before I was going to send those men up the Basak River on a barge that we'd captured. So everything was related to the Viet Cong. From then on, he came back to my camp, Walter McKim, and his little white whirlybird, the Air America helicopter, and I asked him what happened to the quid pro quo, because my friend in Fort Bragg had not called me. I had no message or nothing from the New York Times saying that they'd published an article, which I had as part of the quid pro quo, because we trusted the New York Times in those days. He had nothing to show that the quid pro quo had been met, so I ordered him out of my camp. I had Lieutenant Strait, my XO, escort him to his chopper. And as he is on his way to the chopper, he turned to me and he says, "Captain, you can't fight the company," which is the CIA, "because you can't win." Well, within 6 to 10 days, and I'd have to have my book in front of me to remember this correctly, but you can read it in the book, my agents, and all of my agents were females, and 12 of them, I got a report from my agents through Major Foy that there was an Arvin regiment, and that's like 1,200 men with anti-tank weapons, all kinds of heavy weapons and everything, on landing craft utilities coming up the Basak River to attack my camp and to wipe it out. So Major Foy Van Lee, my counterpart, sent word through a messenger of his with took a couple squads of our irregulars to protect them, took salt boats down to Hoa Hao village, met with the head of the Hoa Hao Central Committee, the chairman. He went immediately. He knew General Dang personally. He went and met with Lieutenant General Quang Van Dang, who commanded all the military in the 4th Corps, and told him what was happening. General Dang immediately picked up his phone. He called Premier Key, who I assumed was in on this whole thing because he worked very closely with the CIA. And he told Premier Key that he was taking over the situation, that he would not have brother killing brother in the 4th Corps. He got a hold of Colonel William O. Desabry, who was his senior aide, American aide, and took him and went in Colonel Desabry's chopper, his helicopter, an HU-1, over the regiment. Colonel Desabry radioed down to the American advisors that were with that regiment and asked them, why are you attacking An Phu? And they radioed back up and said, because there's a renegade captain named Marvin who's leading the Hoa Haos against the central government.
Oh, boy.
Oddly enough, that's the same thing they did in Apocalypse Now,
in
the real story.
Mm-hmm.
They said that his Father Wah and his Catholic, his was all Catholic, indigenous personnel were going to go against the central government. So Lieutenant General Quang Van Dang turned that regiment around, ordered them back to their bivouac area, their camp back near Canto, and then he and Colonel Desabry flew into my camp, and I lined up all the troops, and he personally gave us all amnesty. And that's the end of that story.
Is this kind of thing still going on today, do you think?
I think it could be. And that's what I'm trying to do, is stop it from happening anymore. In fact, my grandson, who was injured over in Iraq, he's home now. In fact, he'll be back here to my place tonight. And he wants to get back to Iraq. He wants to join the Green Berets. And I told him, Daniel, he's named after me, he said, please wait until this book has the impact that it's meant to have, and that I don't have to worry about our government sending somebody to kill you on a mission and then tell us that you got killed in action or you had deserted.
Are you seeing any support from the government at all? I mean, have you contacted representatives in Congress to call for hearings?
I'm working now with, I have to wait for the new Congress, but I'm already began action with Senator Ted Kennedy, and of course, whose brother, I was involved in the cover-up of the assassination of his brother, and Senator Clinton. Senator Clinton has been the only one that's really supported me against some powerful odds in the past.
You know, and that's interesting to hear, because my personal assessment of Senator Hillary Clinton is not a very good one, but she's stood up in this regard, huh?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Republicans aren't going to want you to think good of anybody that's going against the evil in government right now.
Well, that's very true. Now, how about
that's a shame. I'm a Republican, and I've been attacked. Oh, Lord have mercy, the amount of attacks that I've had on the internet. And let me tell you what happened one time in the 1990s. I think it was 1995, but I can't swear to that right now. It'll be in the new book, Victim of the Devious Elite. Congressman Matthew McHugh, senior staffer in Ithaca, New York, called my home and talked to a member of my family and told that member, you can tell Colonel Marvin that he may not be afraid of anybody but Jesus Christ, but remind him that he's got grandchildren. That's the kind of thing that happens with those people. Congressman McHugh had been ordered, and even the name of the CIA agent who talked to him will be in that book, ordered him to have no further communication with me once General Dang got into this country.
Now, General Dang and Major Foy are both men that you write about quite a bit. In fact, you include them in the dedication to the book.
Right.
What kind of men were General Dang and Major Foy?
Oh, General Dang is just one of the finest officers you'd ever meet. I mean, he risked his life just by calling Premier Key and telling him he was taking over the situation. Major Foy Van Lee risked his life by going to the Minister of Defense in 1965 and demanding that he and his forces be allowed to shoot back at the enemy on the other side of the border. The enemy had actually invaded his area and laid out about 6,000 mines, which I led the troops that uncovered all those mines and captured them and blew them up. Both very brave men, very honest men. They're both and their families U.S. citizens now, and they're getting very old. They're very fragile now. I'm so happy that we got the Victory Edition out. They participated in the trial in writing. Not one American supported me in that trial for the truth. Only Vietnamese. 2 interpreters, General Quang Van Dang and Lieutenant Colonel then, although he's no longer in the Army, obviously.
Sure.
Foy Van Lee. They're the only ones, plus the bravest publisher you'd ever meet, Chris Milligan.
Well, I need to speak with him, that's for sure. And you were successful, we should point out, which is why the new edition of Expendable Elite is called the Victory Edition. That's
right. Oh, they were surprised. It's funny because the attorneys, they didn't think we'd even show up, and like I told one of them, I said, you know, what you forgot is that I used to be one of you, and I was the biggest, baddest one of all of you. Why'd they call me Dangerous Dan, right? By the way, if somebody wants to buy that book, they should call 1-800-556-2012 and ask for a signed edition if they'd like it signed, and then it'll be sent right from my office right here. But that's the place to order it, and you can pay it by credit card or anything else. And do you have your copy yet?
I do have my copy, Dan, okay. And I'm honored to have it, and I appreciate you signing it and having sent it to us. It's 500 pages, and I can tell people listening right now, it is full of documents and pictures that support the charges that Dan is making in the book and the stories that he relates here in the book. Just an amazing book that ought to be stirring up a firestorm among the American public, because it is a bombshell revelation. You know, the man who commanded apparently the first U.S. forces sent covertly into Cambodia at a time when the official government position was that Cambodia was off limits. You'd think that would be a big story, but it's not getting attention.
And how about the fact that we were asked to kill the head of another country?
Not to mention the fact that you were asked to assassinate the foreign head of state, and it's not getting any attention.
I have got some interest in the Command and General Staff College. I've talked to the colonel in charge of the history department. I sent him his own personal copy of the book. There's a copy of my book, the Victory Edition, in the Command and General Staff College research library. And I've asked them to come back to me with any questions or documentation they need, and I'm keeping them up to date on different things that are going on that relate to that book. Because every general in the United States Army goes through that college. Mm-hmm. A lot of them as full colonels getting ready to, on the list for general. And we need the power structure of this nation, civilian and military, to know what went on and to keep it from happening again.
Amen to that. Just to change topic for just a moment, there's a story that Sharon posted to Watcher magazine today as we talk about the culture within the military. The Inspector General at the Pentagon is looking into a video that's been released showing generals in uniform endorsing a group called the Christian Embassy, which was founded by Bill Bright of Campus Crusade for Christ. Apparently, there have been complaints from the outside that this constitutes a violation of church-state separation.
Well, that's the case. That's in the Pentagon, right?
Yes.
Right. Well, that's a case like if this witch church organization or any church organization, all of a sudden we as taxpayers were providing the money to have them meet in the Pentagon, the head of all military activities in this nation, it would be wrong. You know, for them to invite people from the Pentagon to a church that's located in Washington, D.C., fine. But no, I'm for that. We should not be allowing that to happen. At the same time, we should not ever be trying to silence Christians.
And that appears to be the case here. Now, I don't know anything about the Christian Embassy other than they appear to be a group that is devoted to praying for people in government, and that this video just shows some generals who support the work that they do. But because they appear...
They have a weekly prayer meeting in the Pentagon in space provided by the U.S. government.
Okay.
Which is not provided to any other religious denomination. Now, what they ought to do is provide it to anybody who wants to sign up to use it, you know. I mean, I'd love to go there and preach.
And I think your word would carry some weight, given your background. One of the disturbing events that you relate in the early chapters of the book was a case in which you were on the helicopter flight to Anfu.
Massacre at Vinja.
Yes. Can you tell the listeners about that?
Yes, I was in a HU-1 helicopter, a full colonel piloting with a warrant officer as a co-pilot and the two gunners in the back of it. And we had passed over a camp called Vinja down in the Delta area, and we're on the way over to Ha Tien, another Special Forces camp, and all of a sudden the helicopter started going down towards the rice paddies, and they started firing like mad out of both machine guns. And I thought, boy, they spotted some enemy. So I leaned over and got on my knees and looked out the door, and here they'd been shooting at unarmed peasants working with water buffalo, men, women, and children in the rice paddies. I took and stopped both machine gunners, undid the latch on the machine guns, took the ammunition belts out, and ordered them to sit back in the corners, and I went up to the pilot's compartment, and I told him that if he did any more of that, I was going to take the helicopter to the ground. I'd crash it rather than see him killing innocent civilians. Now, when we got to Chow Duck, which is the B-team headquarters, where I would report to that commanding officer, the pilot tried to throw me out of the helicopter by the movements of the helicopter, but I made it out okay. But the commanding officer refused to investigate that. And to this date, probably, it was never investigated, but I would imagine there was probably 12 to 20 people, men, women, and children, killed in that rice paddy. And when I asked the colonel why he was doing that, by the way, this is important, he said, well, General Westmoreland wants head body count, and he says, I don't care whose bodies they are, I'm going to give them body count.
Oh, Lord. So
that's
just
the way it was.
So did you understand then that this was not an isolated incident?
I would not think so.
Oh,
look at not the man who's running for president, but the man who had run for president, but
John Kerry.
John Kerry. He actually ordered the death of 23 innocent civilians, during that period of time he was over in Vietnam, he got a Medal of Honor. And he admitted that he did order them, and the reason why, from what I understand, is because they didn't want anybody to know that they were there. Now, when you fire weapons to kill 23 people, somebody, if they're anywhere in the area, know you're there.
Yeah.
You don't kill men, women, old men, women, and children to keep your safety secure. You know, I love the Hoa Haos because they had courage. They were all farmers or fishermen. There were no really educated people there at all. But they would not ever hurt an innocent civilian. And they protected each other. The first time that we went out on a big combat operation, and I asked Major Foy Van Lee, I said, what should my team do to prepare to help the women and children of men who are killed in battle? Because there are men killed in battle. And he said, you don't worry about it. The Hoa Hao take care of their own. He said, every family. I had, at that time, over 500 civilian irregulars working for me. I got up to a high of 692. But at that time, over 500, he said, every single family is already pre-designated to another family to take care of them.
We could learn something from the Hoa Haos in that regard here in this country.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I tell you, you read their precepts, and you'd think that the Lord himself had written them. And the difference between them and real Christians, of course, they haven't asked the Lord into their heart as their personal Savior. That's the biggest difference. But the other difference is they follow the precepts where we don't.
Yep.
I mean, I like to think we try, but we don't.
Dan, we just have a few minutes left. What happened to the Hoa Haos and the other people that were left behind when the United States withdrew from Vietnam?
Well, all I can tell you about is the people that were in my area, but perhaps because they were part of my top secret mission and had gone against the communists inside of Cambodia, Major Foy was 13 years in prison. They lost all their homes. They took away all their land. They did not allow them to meet publicly for their prayer meetings or anything. And they still, to this day, treat the Buddhist Hoa Haos very bad. I'm working with a group of people that hopefully one day we can get the Vietnamese government to allow the Hoa Haos to practice as they'd like to. I'd like to get them all saved.
Yes, amen.
Oh, by the way, there's a lot of them in this country, and in Wichita, Kansas, is where Major Foy Van Lee is and his family. They're all American citizens now, and most of his family are saved and going to a Baptist church that is almost 100% ex-Hoa Hao.
Wow, in Wichita.
In Wichita.
How about that?
Amen, amen. Huh?
Yeah. Now, how did General Dang get into the country?
Oh, wow. That was tough. If it wasn't for Tom Polgar, who headed up all the CIA activities in Vietnam the last 2 years of the war, and was a friend of mine, he would not have made it out of Vietnam. And because he rescued us from them, the CIA did everything they could to assassinate his character. He ended up in Canada when I finally found out what had happened to him, working as a janitor and then a busboy in a restaurant.
Oh, wow.
Until 1989, when I successfully brought him into this country and got him demanded an investigation from President George Herbert Walker Bush to give him what is it called? A permanent entry visa with nothing against him. And I brought him in myself in August of 1989 into this country. He's very frail now. He's old. He's 75, I think.
What an amazing story. And Expendable Elite is just full of amazing stories. And again, lots of pictures and documentation.
Yeah.
And Dan, your website, expendableelite.com, has plenty of samples from the book if people want to check it out early before ordering. They can order from the website. They can also order by phone, as you mentioned, at 1-800-556-2012. And you've also got audio clips from some of your team members at the website?
Almost everything that was used in the trial of a verbal nature is on that website.
It is a remarkable story and one that deserves to be more widely known. And
may I say one more thing before we get off?
Please.
Anybody who read my book and understood what we brought to the trial as far as evidence goes, they would wonder why the CIA or the Special Forces people even had any idea of taking us to court. And it's because they never thought we'd show up.
Their goal
Nobody has, to that day, before that day, showed up to go against them in court.
They figured that they could win just by intimidation or by bankrupting you.
That's right,
yeah.
by intimidation, and but they didn't have the Lord on their side.
Amen. Well, Dan,
you can't intimidate Jesus.
No, and to a Christian, when you think about it, to a Christian, death is not really intimidating anymore.
No, it's the fastest way to where you want to go anyway.
Exactly right. But Dan, we're thankful that you're still around and here and serving as a real example for the rest of us and how to live out your faith and to be filled with the courage that comes from knowing the Lord Jesus Christ. And
it all comes from Him.
Well, Dan, I consider you a true American hero, and I mean that in the fullest sense of the words. And it's a real honor to talk with you again, and look forward to doing it again very, very soon.
Okie dokie. God bless you.
God bless you. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin was our guest on PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert. I thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon on PID Radio.
Stay with us. More from Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin as A View from the Bunker continues. I'm Derek Gilbert.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourself for the most unique special offer in Skywatch TV history. We proudly announce the Vault Declassified Special Collection. For your $35 donation during this very limited time offer, you'll receive the new book by Pentagon analyst Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Progressive Evil: How Radicals Are Redefining America's Rights, Making Her Globally Irrelevant for the End Times. Derek P. Gilbert's astonishing new book, Bad Moon Rising: Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. And the groundbreaking new book from Carl Gallup's Gods of the Final Kingdom, unveiling the secrets of the raging celestial war. And now, in a Skywatch TV first, directly from Tom Horn's personal private vault, you'll receive completely free of charge the never-before-released Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive. This drive is not available anywhere else and comes completely loaded with hundreds of files, including the world-exclusive, behind-the-scenes, off-the-record video interview regarding perhaps the biggest scandal and cover-up in U.S. history. So hot, we're unable to discuss the specific contents on network television. This 2-hour investigative interview has not been released anywhere else and provides new forensic information connected to the Robert Mueller report that may soon send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and around the world. The Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive also includes the Defender Films full-length, 2-time Telly Award-winning documentary movie Inhuman, the much-sought-after Defender Red Letter Edition Bible with expanded Apocrypha on Kindle and digital files, Eastward Bible software, brand new video presentations from the Watchmen Conference, a massive data library of ebooks with tens of thousands of pages and hours of bonus interviews on video with leading prophecy experts. The Tom Horn Secret Files USB flash drive is valued at over $500. Yours now absolutely free when you order the Vault Declassified Special Collection from Skywatch TV. But we're still not done. Skywatch TV's Off the Record series is back by popular demand with the Gods of War edition on DVD, featuring exclusive interviews with Pastor Carl Gallups, senior Pentagon analyst Robert McGinnis, and Derek and Sharon Gilbert on the coming hyper battle between the forces of God and the titans of biblical prophecy. This unprecedented collection, sold separately, holds a retail value of over $600. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. Don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime Skywatch TV exclusive offer that's too hot for network television. The Vault Declassified Special Collection. Available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order online or call 1-844-750-4985.
Shall we begin?
Let's begin now.
Driving the internet to think. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next Sunday night, we get accused of trying to come up with new and innovative and unbiblical ways of analyzing the ancient texts of the Bible. This happens not to be the case. What we are actually doing is trying to return to the worldview of the prophets and the apostles, the guys who understood what the pagan nations around ancient Israel believed and how that influenced biblical theology. Next Sunday night, we're going to talk about what the early church fathers knew about demons, about giants, and about their importance in Christian theology. Jack Davila Ashcraft joins us, comes back for his second appearance here on A View from the Bunker. That is next Sunday evening, July 7th, beginning at 7 p.m. This will be a live broadcast next Sunday night, God willing. 7 p.m. Central Time, which is UTC -5 at vftb.net. Back in 2006, I had the opportunity to interview Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin, a retired Green Beret, who deployed to Cambodia with the understanding that since we weren't supposed to be active in Cambodia, that if he was caught, he or his men were caught behind enemy lines, behind or across the border in Cambodia, that the Pentagon would deny all knowledge of their activities. They would essentially be considered rogue. There would be no protection from the United States government for following the orders that they were given by the politicians in Washington, D.C. And that's why he wrote the book, because Colonel Marvin has grandchildren, or at least did at the time. Now, bear in mind, again, these interviews are 13 years ago, almost 13 years ago, that were serving active duty at the time. And he did not want them in the same situation that he had been in back in the 1950s, 1960s. So I was blessed not only to get him for an interview on PID radio, but back in 2006 and 2007, I hosted a daily secular conservative talk radio program in mid-Missouri. Columbia, Missouri, covered Columbia and Jefferson City, the state capital. We did okay. You can hear I was still trying to find my way a little bit on the broadcast excerpts that you will hear for the next hour or so. But it was good training for what I do now at Skywatch TV. The phone numbers that you'll hear for call-ins, obviously don't call those numbers, because the radio station still exists and they won't have any idea what you're talking about, because, again, these interviews were recorded more than 12 years ago. But the fact that I was able to get Colonel Marvin onto a mainstream conservative talk radio station, my program in the daily schedule fell in between Sean Hannity and Neil Bortz for a time. He's since retired. Michael Savage after that. So it was Hannity, then me, then Michael Savage in mid-Missouri for about 18 months. And every now and then, we brought in a guest that kind of shook up the standard paradigm, because Colonel Marvin was definitely not telling a story that the United States government wanted out there. In fact, he was sued, and you'll hear more of that story here in the interview segment coming up. This was recorded in December of 2006. December of 2006, about the same time frame as the interview on PID radio. I was blessed to bring Colonel Marvin onto mainstream talk radio in mid-Missouri, the Eagle 93.9 and the Eagle 939.com. So now for an extended interview, kind of covering some of the same territory, but bear in mind, doing this on secular, conservative, mainstream talk radio. We continued our interview with the author of Expendable Elite, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin.
Well, I'm just happy as I can be, and blessed, really, to be on your station.
We appreciate it here. Just a note for people listening in, we know that we've got a bit of an echo coming back on the line here, and there is nothing we can do about that, so we're just going to have to muddle through for the next hour and a half. Dan, are you getting that echo on your end?
Not at all. No,
okay.
I did get it on the recording that you had me listen to. But it just sounds just clear as a bell right now.
Okay, well, you can hear fine, and that's the important thing. I'll deal with the echo on my end and try not to get distracted.
Oh, okay.
So, Dan, your book, Expendable Elite, was a record of your time in Vietnam. And I think the important thing to start with is what you start with in the early chapters of your book, that you and your team, your A-team, as a Green Beret, were apparently the first American military unit ordered into Cambodia, a neutral country, in 1966. Is that correct?
Well, the way that it worked is when I reported to Colonel William Tuttle, who was a commander of all Green Berets in the 4th Tactical Corps of Vietnam, he asked me if I would accept the mission. There was no order. There never is on top secret stuff. It's always, they ask you if you do it, and then you say you do it, and it's compartmentalized. So he was not my direct commander. Actually, he was the C-team commander, and then I would report from there to the B-team. But anyway, he asked me if I would accept the mission to be the very first men to have authorization to go into Cambodia against the enemy in their safe havens that had been provided to them up to this date. That was on the day before Christmas of 1965. The enemy had safe havens all the way along the entire border with Vietnam inside Cambodia. And he asked me if I'd volunteer to command the first independent operation to be able to go in there.
Now, Cambodia was officially a neutral nation, correct?
That is correct. Of course, the big problem with the authorization to go into Cambodia is that because of the president giving them the safe havens and the CIA coming up with this going in to satisfy, actually to appease the Hoa Hao community, the Buddhist Hoa Hao community, we were actually going against the president, so that he warned me, Colonel Tuttle did. He said, if you get caught inside of Cambodia, you will be dropped as deserters. If you get hurt or if you need help inside Cambodia, you can't have it because you'll have no artillery support, no air support, and no medevac support. You'll be completely on your own. And, of course, I understood that, but I still volunteered for it. And when I went to leave the room, his office in Can Tho, South Vietnam, day before Christmas, 1965, he told me, he said, just remember, when you leave that door, it will be as if we never met, because everything was top secret.
Now, Dan, why was President Johnson allowing safe haven for the Viet Cong inside Cambodia?
It was some kind of an agreement between he and North Vietnam, to the best of my knowledge, okay, I wasn't in the president's office, that would allow them to continue to have safe haven in Cambodia. I do know this, that the Prince of Cambodia, who I was asked to kill in June of '66, was not the one that authorized the enemy sanctuary in Cambodia. It was our president, and in fact, if you read, or if your listeners would read General Westmoreland's book, A Soldier Reports, he, in that book, which is his autobiography, not written by anybody else, he admits that he was aware of the enemy sanctuaries and also the enemy's use of the Mekong River as their major resupply route to take weapons and ammunition to the enemy inside their safe havens, which they could then use to kill our people on this side and our people up until my own small area, 30 miles of the border, and starting the first day of January 1966, nobody else could fire back into Cambodia against the enemy.
Our guest on the Eagle 93.9 is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin. He's retired Special Forces, Green Beret captain in Vietnam during 1965 and 66, nicknamed Dangerous Dan. Dan, how frustrating was it for you as a soldier to know that the enemy was using the river and using Cambodian territory just yards away from your position for operations, and that you and your fellow soldiers were not allowed to strike back?
Well, the Mekong River now was about near Ha Tien, which was another Special Forces camp, And when I went and visited there and talked to Captain Jim Miles, who had the same position in his area that I did in my area, only his was not an independent operation, and he was not allowed to fire into Cambodia, and he was supposed to control the Mekong River. But like he told me, all I can do is send 2 Green Berets and 2 Vietnamese national policemen onto that ship, and the one that day happened to be a Lithuanian freighter. And he said, all I can do is have them look at the manifest. The manifest on that ship said 10,000 tons of toys. Now, he said, I mean, you don't believe that, right? But he couldn't do anything. Now, if the manifest had said 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition, which was what was on that ship, then they could have stopped the ship with firepower if necessary. But the enemy is pretty smart. I mean, that ship was protected all the way from the South China Sea into up the Mekong River into Cambodia for the enemy. It was protected by our people. Now, we in my area, you mentioned we couldn't shoot back. We could shoot back in my area, and that's the thing that I volunteered to command, was the first operation to fire back into Cambodia at the enemy in their safe havens, and I was tickled pink to do that. Believe me, we were all happy about that, but we could only just go so far into Cambodia, because when you don't have artillery support or air support or medevac, you don't want to get your men so deep in Cambodia that you can get cut off.
Especially if when they did get cut off, they'd be dropped from the rolls as deserters.
That's correct.
We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, U.S. Army Special Forces retired, about his book, Expendable Elite. The website with information, pictures, and even audio from members of his team in Vietnam, expendableelite.com. Our conversation continues, and we'd like to bring you in on it at 874-9390. I'm Derek Gilbert. Straight ahead, the Eagle Tax Advantage, and more with Colonel Marvin. This is the Eagle 93.9 and the Eagle939.com.
Columbia's information superhighway. This is The Drive with Derek Gilbert. Your city, your station, the Eagle 93.9.
Our lines are open if you'd like to put a question to our guests. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, U.S. Army Special Forces retired, captain of a Green Beret A team in Vietnam in late 1965 and through 1966, and his experiences and some of the things that disturbed him about his time there, recorded in his book, Expendable Elite. Expendableelite.com is the website. Now, Dan, I misspoke. The first incident that you record in the book was not the order or request, I should say, to go into Cambodia, but a massacre that you saw on your way to your assignment at An Phu. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. After Colonel Tuttle asked me, if I accept that mission, and he briefed me, and I left his office, I made up my mind right then and there, being that it'd be as if we never met and as if my team never existed if we got in trouble, that I started taking notes on anything and everything that happened for as long as I was alive and in Vietnam. And the first thing that I took notes about was a helicopter picked us up at Can Tho at Colonel Tuttle's headquarters. There was 2 of us, a lieutenant and myself. He was to be stationed at Ha Tien Special Forces Camp, and I was on my way to Chau Duc and then An Phu, which I would command. And I not only commanded the A-team, but also the 500 and some civilian irregulars. This is the first time that had been permitted, where I would have full command. And on the way there, in this HU-1 helicopter with a full colonel flying and a warrant officer as a co-pilot, all of a sudden, west of the Special Forces camp at Rockjaw, South Vietnam, in the Delta area, way down south in the Delta, he all of a sudden started going down towards the ground, and the machine gunners just started pumping out all kinds of rounds towards the ground, and I thought, wow, we've got the enemy in sight. And I crawled over to the door and looked out right on my stomach so I wouldn't fall out of the helicopter because it was banking and everything. I looked down on the ground, and the helicopter gunners were actually shooting innocent peasants who were working in a rice field with a water buffalo and women and children, just old men, women, and children. And I I mean, there was blood all over the water where the machine guns had hit these people and injured or killed them. And right away, I lifted the latches off of the machine guns and took the ammunition belts out of them, threw them on the floor, and I ordered the men to sit back in the corner. And then I went up into the cockpit of that helicopter, and I asked the colonel what the hell he was doing, excuse my language. And I said, "You're killing innocent civilians." And he says, "Look," he says, "Captain," he says, "General Westmoreland wants body count, and I'm going to give him body count. I don't care whose body it is."
My Lord.
So when he finally dumped me off, and he literally did dump me off, tried to hurt me as I exited the chopper, and I went in to report it to get it investigated, the commanding officer of the B team did not report it to higher headquarters, did not investigate it. Nothing happened to it at all.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin is our guest on the Eagle 93.9, and we are taking your calls at 874-9390. Sonny has been holding on, and we go to Sonny in Columbia. Sonny, thanks for calling. We're on the Eagle 93.9.
Good evening, Derek, and good evening there, sir.
Good evening.
I was wondering, there's a couple of names I want to throw at you and see if you had ever had any chance to encounter them in your time over there. Dick Marcinko and Carlos Halfcock. Did you ever
I don't know Carlos Halfcock, but I did know of Dick Marcinko.
Yeah. Okay, I was just wondering because he was prowling and growling, as he likes to put it, in that part of the country down there, and Colonel Halfcock was a Marine sniper, and he kind of ran under the books, so to speak, on missions.
I didn't allow any strangers in my area, whether it was Marines or Army or CIA or anybody. I ordered them all out, and I didn't even let American reporters in my area. I did let Vietnamese because I trusted them.
Well, I can understand that. Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd ever encountered either one of those two in your time over there.
Remind me how to spell Marcinko.
Boy, you're Marcinko, if I'm not mistaken. He's author of a whole series of books that run the gamut between fact and fiction. It kind of
right.
He kind of leaves it to you to decide. A lot of it is fact, but written as fiction.
Right.
Sometimes it's safer that way.
I almost did that before I came to know the Lord as my personal Savior, because I was afraid if I did it nonfiction, which I ended up doing because I did get saved. I was worried more about them sending somebody like me. I was a Special Forces assassin, to kill me for trying to get the truth out. So I thought about doing like Robin Moore did, and Marcinko, and a whole bunch of them, writing fiction based on fact. But then neither you nor anybody except those men who were with me in An Phu would know which was fact and which was fiction. Now I've got something that we actually got taken to court about. They tried to prove it to be fiction. We proved it to be fact. And now we got it out as a victory edition with lots of information on the trial and the lawsuit, so you can tell yourself why the jury decided with us that this is a factual book, even though it goes against the grain of the CIA, who had sent a regiment to kill me and all of my Vietnamese in my camp.
Yeah, they pretty much did the same thing with Marcinko after one of his assignments. He got court-martialed and booted out, and then ultimately re-enlisted. They called him up again and said, we're sorry, come back and continue with what you were doing. But yeah, his series of books is Rogue Warrior, and you just
right.
Red Cell was what they ended up court-martialing him over. Was they had sent him in to test the security at a lot of high security bases. And he basically made a laughing stock of them, and then wrote a book about it, and they didn't like it.
A friend of mine was with him.
Yeah. His adventures are pretty famous, but I was just curious if you'd ever encountered him.
Well, thank you for calling.
Appreciate your call, Sonny. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your service, sir.
Thank you. God bless you.
874-9390 if you'd like to get in and talk with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin about his book Expendable Elite or his time in Vietnam, his adventures at An Phu. And Dan, in the next hour we will talk about your adventures in court, you and your publisher Chris Milligan of Trying Day Publishing, and the experiences you had and who was actually behind the case. We've only got about a minute before our break here, but can you just summarize quickly what the outcome of the case was?
The outcome of the case was a complete victory for the publisher, Chris Milligan, and myself, so that we could not only continue to publish the truth about evil in our government, but we could continue to march on Expendable Elite, and especially with the Victory Edition.
We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, author of Expendable Elite, and to be clear, the book is not anti-military in any way, shape, or form, but it does point out that there are some things that have been going on inside the U.S. government, U.S. military, and the way it's used by the government for quite some time. Our conversation will continue past the top of the hour, and again, 573-874-9390 if you have a question or comment for Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is The Drive on the Eagle 93.9 and the Eagle939.com.
The victims of the human trafficking and sex trade industry have reached a boiling point around the world. But here in the United States, the demand has never been higher. Tragically, the massive growth of these unconscionable underground organizations is due in part to many citizens' disbelief that our modern society is capable of such atrocities, and live in a denial that these crimes are taking place here on our soil each and every day. Skywatch TV and Whispering Ponies Ranch remain committed to providing ministry to the hurting, to the victims of abuses just like this and so much more. This is why we're proud to announce our new partnership with Yaku Buyans and 8 Days Ministry. In an effort to educate on these important topics and provide you with the tools needed to get engaged in the fight against sex trafficking, we present the 8 Days Special Collection. In this timely collection, you'll receive the cinematic movie inspired by actual events from director Yaku Buyans' 8 Days. This shocking presentation masterfully illustrates sequence by sequence how the victims of sex trafficking are often lured into entrapment, portrayed through the eyes of the lead characters. This incredible collection also includes the phenomenal book and companion workbook on disc, Woman of Influence, written by 8 Days screenwriter Philippa Buyans and lead actress Katie Walker. This 30-day devotional and companion workbook on disc is an inspiring, deeply affirming, and educational set that will encourage women to walk in the true identity of influence and purpose bestowed on them as daughters of the Most High God. But that's not all. You'll also receive on DVD the never-before-released, uncensored, off-the-record interview with the team behind the 8 Days movie, featuring Yaku and Philippa Buyans and actress Katie Walker as they disclose the hard-hitting realities of just how far the sex trafficking industry reaches, what the Trump administration has done to rescue thousands of victims, how the children of communities, including yours, may be at risk, and what you can do to fight back. Sold separately, this invaluable collection holds a retail value of $90. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. Sex trafficking is a difficult conversation, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away or help its victims. Understand this epidemic and learn how you can help by ordering the 8 Days Special Collection online now at the Skywatch TV store or call 1-844-750-4985.
Talking the Walk every Sunday night. This is A View from the Bunker. Again, next Sunday night we talk about the early church fathers and what they believed about some of the stranger parts of the Bible, like demons and such like. The mighty men who were of old. Jack Davila Ashcraft joins us. And then we'll talk with Doug Hamp, Dr. Doug Hamp. We've not spoken to him in quite some time, and it is about time, since he'll be one of the featured speakers along with us at the Sons of God Giants of Old Conference coming up in Lubbock, Texas. We'll talk a little bit about that. That was supposed to fade out longer. I would yell at the producer, except that I am he. Anyway, he is also putting together, along with Doug Krieger, who's been a guest on this program in the past, a conference coming up in July, just a couple of weeks, in Denver, Colorado, the One in Messiah Convocation. So we'll talk to Doug Hamp about that. Again, that's next Sunday night, July 7th, here on A View from the Bunker, vftb.net, and it begins to stream live to the web at 7 p.m. Central Time. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin, I had the opportunity to interview him a couple of times and exchanged quite a few emails with him back in 2006, 2007, and for several years after that. Talked with him a few other times, but the first couple of interviews, I thought, which is what you're hearing tonight, are really powerful. And to give you a sense of what he writes about in his book, Expendable Elite, I'm going to quote a chapter from a column that he contributed to the website, expendableelite.com, which is still online, called The Unconventional Warrior. This is from Part 16, Gun Running Green Berets. Quote, by introducing facts gleaned from my personal experience and the documented actions or reactions of others involved, I intend to, both in my writings on this forum and in books to be published, acquaint the reader with the harsh reality of lawlessness sponsored, condoned, and even ordered by higher command, often in response to the political dictates of the White House. Perhaps as important as revealing criminal acts to the reader is the detailing of why it is that so few acts are reported and, once reported, why little or no action that is taken to investigate them. Little or no action is taken to investigate them. Few of those responsible for these particular criminal acts are prosecuted and punished, much less evidence secured or corroborated. End quote. He goes on in this article to cite from a forthcoming book that sadly was not published before he passed, about gun running by fellow special operations soldiers in Vietnam back in the 1960s. And again, his purpose in coming forth in 2006, when Expendable Elite was available and more in top of mind, especially amongst us in the alternative media, was to prevent something like that from happening again, because it was just beginning to dawn on us in 2006 that maybe the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were not quite what we have been told. In fact, it was probably expressing that opinion more than once over the air at the Eagle 93.9 that led to management suggesting that I would perhaps be happier just focusing on website development and not actually talking on the air. And we parted company in late 2007. But again, a good bit of training for what we do now at Skywatch TV. So we'll return now to the interview, the second part of the interview from that period of my life back in 2006 when I was hosting the daily talk show on the Eagle 93.9, the interview with the author of Expendable Elite, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Marvin.
Now, Dan, in the first hour, people listening in might have gotten the impression from our conversation that you were trying to, shall we say, bash the military based on what you saw and experienced in Vietnam back in 1966. Is that true? And
well, let me straighten that out. I love the United States Army, the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, all of them. I've got a grandson in the United States Air Force right now. I've got a grandson in the 82nd Airborne Division. One of my daughters was in the Navy as an atomic weapons technician. We've got the best soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen and Coast Guard people in the world. But we've got some of the most evil leaders, and that's who I'm going after, is those people who would actually put our men in a situation, as General Westmoreland did, where they were fighting the enemy all along the Cambodian border. The enemy could fire into Vietnam and kill our people and wound our people and civilians around them, and we could not, our soldiers could not fire back into Cambodia to kill the enemy. That's the kind of people that I'm going after, not the everyday soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman that's doing the best job in the world for this nation to keep it free.
Now, Dan, why did you call the book Expendable Elite?
That's a good question. The reason it's called that is that we, as Green Berets, and I mean that's a tough bunch of men, we're not afraid of any enemy because we figured that they knew enough about us so they'd be afraid of us. Well, the only thing that we feared was our government, and that would be when they declared us to be expendable. So I thought Expendable Elite, and that's the subject, that's the title that my publisher said would be the one to go.
You know, you had an incident
And by the way, I want to remind you at home that you're welcome to call in and question or even challenge Colonel Marvin on what he's written and recorded in his book Expendable Elite. 874-9390 is the number. Now, Dan, you had an incident you record where you were requested by the CIA to assassinate the Prince of Cambodia. What happened, and how did that result in you basically having a target painted on your back?
Okay, well, that was in June of 1966. The CIA Special Agent Walter McKim came to my camp with a request that I organize a group of Vietnamese irregulars to look like and be armed like the Viet Cong, and to go into Cambodia on this one day that Prince Sihanouk, the head of Cambodian government, went up north to a temple that was near the South Vietnamese border and north of where we were. We were the closest Green Beret camp to that area. Also, we had a reputation of winning every battle that we had with the enemy. So I said, yes, I'll accept that mission, but with a quid pro quo. I said, the President of the United States has got to tell the American people that there will be no more enemy sanctuaries. There will be no more safe havens for the men who are shooting from the other side of the border onto this side of the border. And I want it to be such that a friend of mine in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, will hear the President give the speech and send me a copy of that page of the New York Times that tells about that speech. Of course, the CIA man would gladly have sent me a copy of the CIA copy of the New York Times that they'd printed themselves. And I wanted a friend of mine in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to tell me that. Well, 2 days before this mission, these 42 men were all volunteers in what we called a suicide mission, were to get ready to go onto a Vietnamese barge that we had apprehended from the enemy and go up into Cambodia to ambush and kill Prince Sihanouk. 2 days before that, Walter McKim came back to my camp. This is all in the book. And when he came up to me in the command bunker, I asked him that what happened to the quid pro quo, that I hadn't heard anything from my friend in Bragg. Was the President going to do as I demanded? And he wouldn't even talk about it. He kept asking me about, were things all set, everybody trained and everything. So I ordered him out of my camp, and Lieutenant Strait was my XO. I ordered John to take him to his little white whirlybird, it's an Air America helicopter, and get him out of the camp. And as he was leaving the command bunker and walking across towards the helicopter with Lieutenant Strait, he looked back at me and he says, "Captain, you can't fight the system because you can't win." And about 6 to 10 days after that, and I apologize, Derek, for not looking in my book and getting the exact number of days, I got word from my agents, and all of my agents were females, and we had very good reason for that, which we can get into later. But they reported that there was an Army of Vietnam regiment of about 1,200 men with anti-tank weapons, every big weapon that they had in their inventory were on the way up the Basak River in Navy landing craft utilities with a specific mission to attack and destroy my camp.
1,200 men against how many under your command?
Well, there was my A-team, Vietnamese A-team, and about 400 South Vietnamese. And the biggest weapon we had was one 50 caliber machine gun.
So how did you avoid getting killed?
Well, as soon as we got word from our agents, we respected our agents to tell us nothing but the truth. Major Foy Van Lee, who was my counterpart, sent an envoy from our camp, I believe it was one of his lieutenants in his Special Forces team, up the river with a squad of indigenous personnel, my strikers we call them, to protect him, and went right down the Basak River and over to the Mekong, and there met with the chairman of the Hoa Hao, the Buddhist Hoa Hao Central Committee. This man knew General Quang Van Dang, Lieutenant General Quang Van Dang, who commanded all Vietnamese forces in the 4th Corps, which would have meant he commanded that Arvin regiment that was headed up our way to kill us. He met with General Dang in his office. General Dang had known nothing about this. We learned later that it was something that had been rigged up between the CIA and Premier Key, who was very much pro-CIA. And General Dang immediately got on the telephone, called the President of Vietnam, Premier Key, and told him he was taking over the situation, and he didn't want brothers killing brothers in his corps. He immediately went on across the hall, got a hold of Colonel William O. Desabry, full colonel, United States Army, who was his senior advisor, got in Colonel Desabry's helicopter, flew over that regiment when they were about from between 2 and 10 minutes to hit my camp, and he radioed down to the advisors, the American advisors that were with that regiment, and asked them, why are you attacking An Phu? And they said, because there's a renegade captain named Marvin who's leading the Hoa Haos against Saigon, against the central government, which was a lie. And General Dang immediately ordered the regiment to turn back to their home base, and then he and Colonel Desabry flew into my camp with their armed helicopter escorts and gave I called everybody in there in formation, and he gave everybody a safety from any possibility of harm from courts or military.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin is our guest on the Eagle 93.9. His book is Expendable Elite, the new edition called the Victory Edition. Now, Dan, how did it make you feel realizing that the guys who were supposed to be on your side were coming after you?
Well, at first I felt like I was betrayed. And I didn't remember something that after the trial and after we had victory and I started to write the additional 100 pages that go onto the book, that are in the book, with the publisher, I had it phrased to head out with a title, Betrayed. And I sent it to a friend of mine who's an ex-Green Beret, and he called me right away. He says, Dan, you can't do that. And I said, why? He says, you just think back to the 28th day of January of 1984, which was the day before I came to know the Lord Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Take you back to that day, and you would have done the same thing that your men did. And I explain in my book that I'm not mad at a one of them. They were doing what they've been taught to do. They've been intimidated. Lieutenant Strait, as a matter of fact, my XO, the last time I tried to reach him by phone before the trial, his wife answered the phone and said, Dan, I can't let you talk to John or we'll lose our retirement pay.
Really? Now, who was making that threat against Lieutenant Strait?
Well, I would imagine it was probably the CIA through the Special Forces Association. Because that's every one of my men who were plaintiffs against me had been contacted by, met with, and were supposedly paid all their expenses with the Special Forces Association. But then we found out after the trial, and after we got a financial statement from the Special Forces Association, for the 4 months of January, February, March, and April, and the trial ended the 27th day of January, not one penny was spent from the Special Forces Association to pay the expenses of the plaintiffs, the witnesses, or the attorneys. And we're talking about a total of about $300,000 in expenses. Of course, we didn't have to pay them because we won. But we assume, and I can't prove it, you can't hardly prove anything with the CIA, but I assume that they did like they did with General Quang Van Dang when I finally got him into this country, and I demanded some kind of help, and Tom Polgar helped me on it. He was the last CIA head in all of South Vietnam. He was the station chief for the last 2 years of the war, and he helped me to gain some $20,000 total for General Dang to help him get settled into this country after his character being assassinated and everything for about 14 years by the CIA. And they gave him that money in 4 plain envelopes with nothing written on them, of $5,000 each of unmarked bills, so he could prove nothing about where they came from.
Interesting. So
Yep.
the CIA has a long memory, it appears. They couldn't wipe you out in 1966, so they tried to take you out in court in 2006, 40 years later. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, the author of Expendable Elite, is our guest on the Eagle 93.9, and we'd like you as part of the conversation. It's 874-9390 if you want to call in. Area code 573-874-9390 if you're listening in on the internet stream and calling from outside mid-Missouri. Our conversation continues. We want to talk about safe havens and whether our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan are dealing with them too. This is The Drive on the Eagle 93.9 and the Eagle939.com.
Now from the heart of America, bringing the world to Columbia and Columbia to the world. This is The Drive with Derek Gilbert on your city, your station, the Eagle 93.9.
Boy, that kind of an intro, it's hard to live up to. Tomorrow morning, Tim Murphy will have some expert advice for you. The Expert Minutes with Dr. Charles Mattingly, DDS. Tips on how to brighten up your smile just in time for the holidays. And, of course, Shelley Tucker with the latest news and Eagle Eye traffic and weather together every 10 minutes on the 10s. That's tomorrow morning between 5:30 and 8 on the Eagle 93.9. Talking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin and his book Expendable Elite. And, Dan, here we are almost halfway through our time, and we've not yet told people where they can find a copy of your book if they're interested.
Right. The best place to get it, especially if you want a signed copy, is to dial 1-800-556-2012, and that's Trine Day Press. Tell them that you'd like to have a signed copy of Expendable Elite. They'll take your credit card number and everything, and then he'll let me know with a copy of the invoice, and then I'll mail it direct from here, signed to whatever person you want it signed to, and it's always nice to give me a little bit of background, too. But it's funny, I went to an antique store today, and they had my book on the shelf, and they had it listed as rare. The first edition.
Interesting.
Right.
Of course, this new edition...
We only published so many, and then after the trial, they all sold.
That's right. And the new edition, the Victory Edition, in recognition of that victory in court over the Special Forces Association. Our number, again, 874-9390, if you'd like to call in and ask a question of Colonel Marvin. During a break, a little while back, I won't mention any names, but there was a gentleman who called and questioned or was challenging some of the things that Colonel Marvin was saying. And just let it be known that Colonel Marvin is open to talking to anybody, whether you're in agreement or interested in what he's saying, or whether you think that he's perhaps stretching the truth. We'll take your calls at 874-9390. Now, Dan, one of the big problems you faced and your men faced in Vietnam. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'd like to mention to anybody who's listening, I'd be glad to have them contact me through the website or on the phone today on the air. I'd be glad to talk to anybody because I only speak about the truth. It cost $152,000 just to put that truth forward in the court in Charleston, South Carolina, and when we arrived in that courtroom, the Special Forces Association representatives, the attorneys there, were surprised. They didn't think that we'd showed up. We were the very first ones, Chris Milligan, my publisher, and I, to the best of my knowledge, to ever show up in court against the Special Operations people. They just assumed we'd be scared to death. And like I told one of their attorneys, I said what he forgot was that I was one of them, and I was the biggest, baddest one of them.
Now, Dan, you're in New York, and your publisher is in Oregon. Why did they file this lawsuit in Charleston, South Carolina?
Well, because Colonel Tuttle, who's deceased now, he's dead now, was the lead plaintiff, and he lived there in Charleston because Charleston was very much a pro-military town, and they thought that they would convince the jury. In fact, one of the attorneys said there's not a member of that jury going to vote for Dan Marvin. They wanted to convince everybody there that I was anti-military. And when I went in there, you could tell I'd been a soldier for 21 years, where the plaintiffs looked like a bunch, one of my friends said they looked like a bunch of bums. They didn't have any military bearing whatsoever, where my publisher and I both showed the people in that courtroom, and especially the jury and the judge, that we cared about the United States of America. We cared about our military services, and we were just trying to correct the evil in it.
The big problem that you faced, that our men and women in Vietnam faced in the 1960s, were the safe havens in Cambodia. Are our soldiers today in Iraq and Afghanistan facing anything similar?
Well, I do know this, that General Tommy Franks, at one time in an interview with the Cigar Aficionado, stated that he was concerned. In fact, I think he mentions it in his book, that he was concerned that we were giving sanctuaries to the enemy in Iraq, similar to the safe havens that we gave the Viet Cong in Vietnam, inside of Cambodia, across the border. Now, if that doesn't tell you that he was concerned, then what else would? We do know for an absolute fact, I have friends that were over there, that they could have weapons and people hidden in mosques, and then could attack from those mosques in the middle of the night, and we were not allowed to destroy those mosques simply because they were mosques. That's a safe haven for the enemy at that time, if it was used that way.
Is that a military decision, Dan, or is that a political decision?
I would assume it was political. I mean, it's the same president, the same commander-in-chief, who told the American people on more than one occasion, I heard him myself personally on the radio, tell the American people that the God of Islam was the same as our God. Now, you and I know the difference.
I think any Muslim would say the same thing.
Amen.
They recognize Jesus as a prophet, but not as God in the flesh. Yeah, there's quite a difference. We're talking with
Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad as a much better prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin. He's the author of a book called Expendable Elite, which is a remarkable document of his time in Vietnam and the experiences that he encountered, and some very disturbing tales as well about the way the military was used there. And we'll talk more in about 5 minutes as we continue about the lessons we can draw from the experience of this A-team captain, former A-team captain in Vietnam, and the way our military is being used today.
Live, local, listening to you. The Drive with Derek Gilbert. Your city, your station. The Eagle 93.9.
Now, you heard about that movie that was out over the summer, Snakes on a Plane. One of the big flaps going on right now in the United States is Shakes on a Plane. The Council on American Islamic Relations trying to pick a legal fight over the case of the imams in Minneapolis who were complaining about the way they were treated on a U.S. air flight. Michael Savage has been following that story, and he will have more to say about that just after 7 o'clock here on the Eagle 93.9. We rejoin Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, U.S. Army Special Forces retired, Green Beret, captain in Vietnam between late 65 and 1966, and his book Expendable Elite. Dan, when you went to put this book together and assembled the information you'd collected, what kind of help did you get from the former members of your team in Vietnam?
Well, it was really great. It was 1988 when I put together the first draft manuscript. And it took me 4 years to put together all the material, to get the material that I'd sent to my friend in Fort Bragg, and to go into some research, too, so I could have proof of what other people said about what happened. And so I sent a copy of that manuscript to those team members who I could locate. And each and every one of those turned out to be a plaintiff at the trial. But anyway, in 1988, Lieutenant Strait and Specialist Sorois sent me a number of tapes, I think 5 tapes total, that told about what they thought about the manuscript. And they all, in every place in their audio tapes, they said they thought it was, they had no problem with the truth of it. They had things they wanted to add. Lieutenant Strait, believe it or not, added the fact that I had saved his life at Con Bin during a battle. In the courtroom, he denied that it ever happened. But on that audio tape, and you can tell by the tone and the structure of the audio tape itself, if he was telling the truth. He was trying to help me to have the best possible book. He even tells in that audio tape about remembering the Arvin Regiment coming to attack us. Now, anybody that has any doubt about my veracity, as that one almost caller had, they can go to the website and they can listen to each and every one of those.
So the fellows who recorded audio tapes for you in support of your book were the guys who went to court 18 years later,
right,
to file a suit for libel.
That's right. It's interesting, too, that the Special Forces Association, who organized this entire trial, got the people together, handpicked the attorneys, and developed the whole scenario for it, tried to frighten me with a few letters and calls to my home and that. Anyway, it threatened my publisher, specifically, in writing, threatened the man who had bought the screenplay rights by telephone to his attorney. But those same men are the ones then that were plaintiffs at the trial, three of them, of the plaintiffs at the trial. And they were the ones who we put on the stand, and we played those audio tapes to the jury so they could tell.
Case over at that point, I would think.
Amen.
874-93...
Well, it only took them, after 9 days of testimony, it only took them 2 hours, which included a lunchtime, to come up with a verdict.
874-9390 is the phone number if you'd like to call in and talk with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin. Dan, we had a caller who just wanted me to pose a question to you regarding Lieutenant Calley, which that was the My Lai incident, was it not? The My Lai massacre?
Right.
Were you familiar with him, or what can you comment on that?
I have no personal knowledge, and I only write or testify to things that I have personal knowledge of.
But you did see that incident from the helicopter at Rockjaw.
Yes.
Was that, to your understanding, an isolated incident?
No, I don't think so. I think that General Westmoreland's fanatic need for body count to try and prove that he was winning a war that he wasn't is what led a lot of people to kill a lot of innocent people. That's why I would not even allow CIA agent McKim in with his pre-Phoenix program team that he would take into areas such as mine, and he would selectively go through and decide who was pro-communist and who wasn't, and then they would just kill them.
What was the Phoenix program?
The Phoenix program was when it was officially titled. It became the Phoenix program. There's a book by Douglas Valentine called The Phoenix Program, The Phoenix Program, and it basically tells, I think it's between 30 and 40,000 Vietnamese were killed by the CIA agents of, the people that worked with those CIA agents in Vietnam, just under that Phoenix program. 30 to 40,000 people, half of them could have been innocent. I didn't let them into my area. I didn't let anything that I couldn't control in my area. I kept the B-52 bombers out. I kept Agent Orange out. I kept the American reporters out, like I said earlier.
Dan, what lesson do you want people to take from your book as we look ahead at the U.S. military in the 21st century? What changes do you want the government to make in the way it handles and orders about the U.S. military?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because I've got a grandson in the 82nd Airborne Division right now. He would love to become a Green Beret, and I told him, please, just wait until this book has had the impact that I want. And right now I'm working with two senators, and I won't name their names right now today, maybe on a future program, and I've asked them to have a hearing in Congress where we could discuss the aiding of the enemy, because I have provided them, and I have provided the Judge Advocate General of the United States Army just within the last few months, and bringing it to a point here about 2 or 3 days ago, to a peak. I have given them evidence which is corroborated by none other than General Westmoreland in writing and Colonel William Tuttle, both of who are dead now, but Colonel Tuttle in a sworn deposition that was read in court in that trial that proves beyond any doubt that somebody above them ordered the enemy to have sanctuaries and to have the use of the Mekong River.
And again,
that's what I want our people to know. I want everybody that listens to write their senator, write their congressman, tell them call Dan Marvin in front of you, and let's get the truth about this stuff.
Hey, Justin, do I remember correctly that incoming Senator Claire McCaskill is on the Armed Services Committee?
Yes, she is.
Okay, so our incoming senator here in Missouri, Claire McCaskill, who was elected over Jim Talent, will be a member of the Armed Services Committee. So maybe
That's
we can.
the ones I'd like him to contact.
Dan, what was your objection to the Vietnam War? Was it with the war itself, or just the fact that our government was playing politics and allowing the enemy sanctuary?
We were not allowed to win the war. You know, in my area, of course, I had an independent operation. And if you read the book, which we proved in court, you can see where everything that was done that way was done to help the Vietnamese people, and then they defended their area. We didn't lose any battles. We had the most secure area in all of Vietnam, but we did it what I feel to be the right way. When you can't let them have sanctuary, you can't let them ship weapons and ammunition up a river that you're protecting so it can get to the enemy. You can't do like President Johnson did and personally order every Air Force target attack in North Vietnam. You've got to give our forces on the ground the right to win. Well, they did not want us to win that war, and that's the biggest problem in a nutshell.
Do you see parallels with the way things are happening in Iraq?
Yes, I do. I mean, when I talked to General Tommy Franks, when he was still in charge of that whole operation over there in his headquarters down in Florida, I called him and I asked him what he felt was the thing that was wrong in the beginning, so to speak. He had to go to a meeting, so he turned me over to this lieutenant colonel. I'll be glad to send you that if I haven't already. Well, it's in my article, Revisit the Past.
Right.
Right. And that colonel told me, point blank, that the thing that bothered the general the most was he only got half the people that he wanted, half the forces, because he wanted to, when he captured a city, he wanted to leave a force there to take care of the people in that city. He couldn't do it. He just had to leave it over to all the rebels and the bad people, the fundamentalists.
You know what's really interesting about that, Dan, not to interrupt, but there's a story out today, an interview that outgoing Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld gave to Laura Ingraham, talk show host. He says, and this is news as of today, he said that Tommy Franks himself said that he could do it with less than 200,000 men, and that Rumsfeld said he was prepared to send between 300,000 and 500,000.
They are both lying. That's all I got to say. Because if Rumsfeld wanted to send 400,000, he would have ordered Franks to take the number of men that he stated and leave them in reserve if he didn't need them right at the start. I mean, it's one of the things of real advantages to me of having an independent operation. I had to make all those calls myself, only on a much smaller area, of course, than a nation. But General Franks, even though his man told me that and told me that General Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld didn't have anybody on his advisory staff, to the best of their knowledge, that had any combat experience. I mean, he refutes that in the book that he wrote after retired and after he got the job of starting the new Army Museum. I don't know what salary he got for that. But he, just like Lieutenant Strait and Sergeant Taylor and all those people that were plaintiffs against me in court and who I proved to be wrong by proving myself to be right and Chris Milligan to be right, those people are the same kind of, having the same kind of problem in dealing with the truth that they don't want to tell on themselves and on their leaders.
Very diplomatically put. Our guest is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin. His book is Expendable Elite. Visit the website expendableelite.com. Final segment coming up. If you'd like to weigh in, pro, con, or just to ask a question, 874-9390, area code 573-874-9390 if you're calling outside mid-Missouri. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is The Drive on the Eagle 93.9 and the Eagle939.com.
The Drive with Derek Gilbert. Your city, your station. The Eagle 93.9.
Our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, author of Expendable Elite, his website, expendableelite.com. And Dan, let's remind people one more time where they can get a copy of the book, especially if they'd like a signed copy.
Right. They should call 1-800-556-2012 and ask for a signed copy, and they can take their credit card right then and there. That's the publisher's office. And then he'll notify me with a copy of the invoice. And really, I like whoever is buying it to tell me not only whose name they want it made out to, but just a bit of biography on them, so I can say something special.
Dan, you were featured in a special on the History Channel some time back, The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Right.
And you talked about the fact that you were approached by the CIA, or apparently, to assassinate somebody who was connected to the John F. Kennedy case.
Right. It was in the first week of August of 1965. I was called to Colonel C.W. Patton, P-A-T-T-E-N. He was the group commander of the 6th Special Forces at Fort Bragg. He called me into his office and told me to go down and meet a company man under the pine trees, which would be away from any buildings or people hearing. And he had called another officer up and told him to do the same thing, and we walked down together towards the pine trees, and then we got to about 40 feet from the agent. I went ahead and left him standing there because you don't want two people knowing any one thing. And when I came up to the CIA agent, he showed me identification. I don't remember what his name was. It was probably a fake one anyway. And he asked me if I would take the mission of assassinating an American that was about to give secrets to the enemy. And I said, certainly. I said, I don't want anybody giving secrets to the enemy. Of course, what I didn't know at the time was the secrets were the actual proof, the actual photos of the John F. Kennedy autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Huh.
And this gentleman, Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pitzer, P-I-T-Z-E-R, who I was asked to kill, was the man who took those pictures by remote control. And I asked him where the man was. I assumed that whoever it was I was being asked to kill was overseas, because the way it worked, they used Green Berets overseas, they used Mafia in the United States. I was already on orders to report to 5th Special Forces Group headquarters in Vietnam, so I assumed I'd go there, I'd do the job, get dropped from the rolls while I do the job, get back, be picked up again, and nobody even know I was gone back home. And I said, look, I can't accept this job. I said, I got a wife and 3 children here at Fort Bragg. If all of a sudden I disappear today to do this job for you, they won't even know where I'm gone, or, they'll be worried sick. And so I refused the job. And I don't know who took the job, but I know that the next year he was killed in his office, and I believe at the time he was killed, and there's a book out about it, Without Smoking Gun, by Kent Heiner. I assume that he was going up into his overhead to get those pictures. He was about to retire, and he'd been offered a job, same kind of job you got, only on television. And he was going to then release the information about those movies and photographs of the John F. Kennedy autopsy to the public when he was retired. He knew he couldn't dare do it while he was still on active duty, because he'd be in Leavenworth Prison very shortly, and they wouldn't even let him tell the public about it. So anyway, that's what I think happened. I found out about it later, what really happened, when I saw a special about the Kennedy assassination. It happened to name him as one of the 42 men that were somehow tied in with the assassination, the autopsy, or the cover-up, and that was his name. So I found, through the help of a friend of mine, found his widow, and I talked to her twice. I taped both conversations, those tapes have been given to a lot of different people, and they'll be part of some of the information on there will be part of a documentary coming out this fall. And basically, she tells me on those audio tapes that she was ordered by Navy officers not to ever discuss her husband's death with anybody.
Dan,
and she was never given an autopsy, a complete autopsy, until I arranged it.
You have led a much more interesting life than I hope to lead for the rest of my time on this earth.
My wife wishes I hadn't.
I can only imagine, and thank her for us that she allowed you this time to talk with us on the air this afternoon. Again, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin, the book Expendable Elite, expendableelite.com, and Dan, we just pray for your safety and for the safety of your grandson still serving in the military, and we thank you for your service and for the service of your grandsons, and for your daughter as well.
I thank the Lord for you and your station and the people that are listening, and I pray that as many as possible have the courage, and they can check this whole thing out either at the court in Charleston or on the website, that they have the courage to write their senators and their congressmen and tell them, look, let's get the truth. This affects every single man and woman that's presently in the armed forces. Are we giving the enemy sanctuary? And it's been proven in my book in court. God bless you all.
Dan Marvin was called home to be with the Lord in 2012 at the age of 78. His legacy through this book is one that I hope that is not forgotten. And as we approached Independence Day this week, it seemed like an appropriate time to bring forth these interviews again, and hopefully make you aware of some things that the mainstream political elite would love to just have flushed down the memory hole and completely forgotten. We conservative American Christians are susceptible to this kind of delusion because we tend to be very patriotic. We don't want to believe that our country, that the leadership of our country is capable of such things. And yet, historically, the record shows that it is, in fact, capable and has committed acts that we would call atrocities. And not just against people in foreign lands, but against people right here in the United States as well. Everything from dosing unwitting subjects with various chemical substances to literally trying to weaponize the occult. Paid for by your tax dollars and mine. Again, the website expendableelite.com is still online, and many of the articles that Colonel Marvin wrote are still available for you to read to this day, 7 years after his passing. And I encourage you to do so. Follow the links in the show notes at vftb.net, or if you're watching this or listening through YouTube, I should say youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever. Follow the links to expendableelite.com. The book is worth adding to your reference library, and Colonel Marvin's memory is worth preserving because, I will say again, he truly was an American hero. Well, just a few notes about upcoming events on our calendar. The Skywatch TV Defender Conference coming up just, over a month away now, August 2nd through 4th. Of course, it's sold out, but the streaming video option is available. That would bring the entire conference essentially right to your home so that you can watch it in the comfort of your home. You can pause us when you need to take a break. Watch us on your schedule, and you'll have access to all of the HD presentations for 3 months after the conference. For more information and to sign up, just $79, by the way, brings Mike Heiser, Carl Gallups, Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Michael Lake, me, Sharon, Josh Peck, Joe Horn, Stephen Bankars, Shelley Neese, Joel Richardson, and more right into your home. Just $79, and you sign up at defenderconference.com. That's the website, defenderconference.com. The Sons of God Giants of Old Conference, Biblical Giantology, Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Judd Burton, Dr. Aaron Judkins, Dr. Doug Hamp, Dr. Greg, lots of doctors, and then Sharon and me. Joe Taylor from the Mont Blanc Museum as well. Did I get the name right? I'll have to double check that for next week. You've seen his picture on the web, I'm sure. The guy standing next to the replica of the giant femur I think. Anyway, biblical giantology is the topic, and registration for this conference is only $5. This is August 16th through the 18th at The Fellowship in Lubbock, Texas. For more information and to reserve your place, log on to burtonbeyond.com. That's Dr. Judd Burton's website, burtonbeyond.com. Answering the alien question. That's the theme of the True Legends Conference in September with L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Tim Alberino, ufologists like Richard Dolan, Dr. Hugo de Garis, Chase Kletzky, George Knapp, and more. That'll be at the Mansion Theater in Branson, and there will be streaming video available for that as well. Still, I believe, some seats for the conference, but to find out for sure, log on to gen6.com. That's GENSIX.com. In October, we got 2 conferences. The Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference, October 4th through 6th. That's at the Grand Hyatt on the Riverwalk in San Antonio. Sharon and I are honored to be featured speakers there, not only speaking at the conference, but speaking together at the luncheon on Sunday. Other speakers include Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Carl Gallups, Ryan Pitterson, Jim Barfield, director of the Copper Scroll Project, Paul McGuire, Pastor Billy Crone, and more. For information and to reserve your place, log on to unsealedscroll.org. That's unsealedscroll.org, and use the promo code Gilbert20. That's Gilbert20 to save 20%. And that promo code will work the following weekend, October 11th through 13th, for the Hear the Watchman Conference coming to Orange County, California. It's at the Hilton Irvine. L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Messianic Rabbi Zev Parat, Pastor Paul Begley, Josh Peck, Stephen Bankars, Gans Shimura, Troy Anderson, Paul McGuire, Michael Buldea, and more. And again, use promo code Gilbert20 to save 20%. HearTheWatchmen.com. Our Israel trip has been moved to October of 2020, October 12th through 23rd. For information, log on to lipkintours.com and join us. We're going to hit a lot of archaeological sites in Israel when we go next October. Leave us a review at Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which is, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Give us a like at Facebook. And remember, A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.